An ex-soldier named Koichi sees a wrecked boat in the sea and wonders if it could be an indication of something dangerous ahead. However, the boat captain tells him not to worry because he has all the resources to deal with whatever comes. Just as he then looks ahead, a large monster swims out of the sea and charges towards them. A few years earlier, Koichi arrives with his fighter jet on a naval airfield. There, he meets some naval mechanics who quickly help him check his jet since he claims there's something wrong with it. After a while, the leader of the mechanics, Tachibana, meets with Koichi to commend him for his efforts in the war. However, he mentions that everything seems to be in order with the fighter jet. Koichi asks if he's implying that he ran away from the war, but as Tachibana doesn't answer, he walks away. While he's then sitting by the shore, Tachibana comes over to tell Koichi that he's in support of what he did. He also says he doesn't understand why anyone would obey an order to die honorably when it's certain that they'll be killed anyhow in the war. Just then, Koichi sees some deep-sea fish floating on the water. Later that night, Tachibana and his men sound an alarm because they've seen some movement to show that the enemy is getting close to them. Koichi looks shocked to hear this, and as they all wonder what will happen to them, a large monster swims out of the water. One of the mechanics then mentions that the monster is Godzilla. He says he heard some of the locals talk about how the dangerous monster has been disturbing them. All the men immediately run to take cover, and while Godzilla destroys their camp, Tachibana tells Koichi to help them by entering his fighter jet and shooting the monster down. Even though he initially hesitates, Koichi runs to his jet, but as he's about to take the shot, he freezes. He then has to remain silent when Godzilla gets close to him. Following this, Godzilla finally attacks the mechanics and kills them. The monster also destroys Koichi's jet, but he's lucky to escape before he's killed. After a while, Godzilla returns to the sea and Koichi sees all the dead mechanics. He also sees Tachibana arranging the bodies while crying and saying his men didn't deserve to die. As he looks back, he sees Koichi and charges toward him for allowing his men to die, while also calling him a coward. Shortly after, Tachibana and Koichi eventually leave the airfield on a ship. As they head separate ways, Koichi returns to his village. Unfortunately, he sees that his parents' house has been destroyed, and this leaves him disappointed. After a while, a woman named Sumiko recognizes him and asks why he's back home instead of fighting in the war. As he says nothing, she realizes that he ran away, so she calls him a coward. Koichi then asks if his parents are still alive, but Sumiko tells him that nearly everyone in the village, including her children, is dead. The next day, while Koichi walks around aimlessly, he sees a mob chasing a lady named Noriko, who is carrying a baby. As she bumps into him, she drops the baby with him and runs away. Koichi is shocked by this, but he holds on to the baby and waits for Noriko to show up. A few hours later, Koichi gets tired of waiting, so he decides to take the baby home. On his way, Noriko bumps into him again. As she then takes the baby back, she asks why he didn't leave the baby. He says he couldn't just leave her alone, and Noriko finds this interesting, so she follows him. Koichi tries to stop her, but she refuses to back down. When they get to his house, he asks if she can now leave, but she says she won't. He then asks about her husband, but she says she's not married. She also mentions that the baby belongs to one of the victims of the explosions in the village. Koichi is surprised by this, but Noriko says she's just like him because he also refused to leave the baby when he had the chance. As he then asks about her family, Noriko says she's all by herself. Koichi realizes that she has nowhere to go, so he eventually lets her and the baby sleep over. The next day, while Koichi is out to get something, Sumiko sees him and asks about the girl and baby he took in. She says it's too late for him to try to be a hero, but he tells her that he only helped them because they had no place to stay. Sumiko then asks if the baby has been breastfed, but Koichi says she hasn't because Noriko is not the mother. Following this, Sumiko offers to help get something for the baby to eat. A year later, Noriko and the baby, Akiko, remain in Koichi's house. After a long day, Koichi returns home and tells Noriko that he has already gotten a job as a shooter for a boat. Noriko doesn't like this because it sounds dangerous, but Koichi tells her it's not as bad as she thinks. He also says he needs the money to provide for her and Akiko. The next day, Koichi leaves the house to begin his first day at work. However, as he sees the boat he's supposed to work with, he looks disappointed because it's small and wooden. Just then, the owner of the boat, Noda, welcomes Koichi. He also mentions that they're using a wooden boat because of the mines that the US Army has placed inside their seas. Noda tells him that, unlike metal boats that can trigger the mines, the wooden boat will allow them to move freely. Koichi finally understands this, and he also meets the boat captain, Akitsu, and a young crew member named Mizushima. After this, they all board the boat to leave. On the way, Akitsu explains to Koichi that while two of Noda's boats are passing, they'll cut the wires connected to the mines so that they'll float to the top. When this happens, he then says that Koichi will shoot and destroy them so that the mines don't become a problem for them. Koichi starts working immediately, and he also seems to enjoy his work. Days later, while he's at home, he has a nightmare where he sees Godzilla destroying Noda's boat. As he looks scared when he wakes up, Noriko then comforts him. Many months later, Koichi continues to enjoy his job, and Noriko also continues to teach Akiko as she grows older. One day, Koichi's co-workers follow him home to have dinner. After Noriko serves them, Noda takes her picture and commends her for the nice meal. Akitsu then tells him to stop trying to flirt with her, but Noda says he can't do that because she's married. However, Noriko says she's not a wife yet. This leaves the men shocked, and Koichi finally explains how Noriko and Akiko have been staying with him since he first met them. As Akiko then calls him her dad, he tells her she's not his daughter. Mizushima thinks it's quite harsh, but Koichi doesn't think he did anything wrong since he's not her dad. A year later, Noda and his workers see a wrecked ship on the sea. As they wonder what could have happened, Koichi sees dead fish floating on the surface. He immediately remembers what happened the last time he saw something like that, so he informs Noda and the others. However, Akitsu thinks a monster like Godzilla can't exist. Noda then says that the government is sending a ship named Takao to inspect the wrecked ship. He also says that if Godzilla shows up, they can use the two mines on the boat to kill the monster. Much later, Koichi seems really uncomfortable because he knows how dangerous Godzilla can be. Noda tries to keep him calm, but as he sees more dead fish, he says there's a huge chance that Godzilla is now bigger and stronger. Despite advising them to leave, Akitsu says they can face whatever is coming. However, as he sees Godzilla appear from under the sea, he looks shocked and terrified. Koichi then has to help with navigating the boat to escape from Godzilla. As they're moving away, they then drop the first mine to blow up on Godzilla, but it doesn't affect the monster. Koichi then suggests releasing the mine when Godzilla opens its mouth. After this happens, the mine is released, and even though it hurts the monster, it appears to have super fast healing powers. As Godzilla then charges toward the boat, the Takao arrives and shoots several missiles at the monster, but it still survives. It then goes after the Takao and wipes out everyone on board. As Godzilla leaves, Koichi then passes out after getting injured. When he wakes up, he asks about Godzilla, but Noda says no one knows where it is. He then says they need to tell everyone, but Akitsu mentions that the government still wants to keep it private to avoid spreading panic. Days later, when Koichi goes home, Noriko asks him what happened, but he refuses to say anything. As she then says that she doesn't understand why he won't accept her help, Koichi finally tells her about how he went to the airfield to hide from the war. He also tells her what happened during his first encounter with Godzilla. As he blames himself for the death of the mechanics, saying he doesn't deserve to be alive, Noriko tells him not to say that. Koichi then says he keeps having nightmares about the dead men, who are always telling him to join them. As he breaks down in tears, Noriko holds and consoles him. The next day, after Noriko leaves for work, Koichi stays with Akiko at home. Shortly after, he hears an announcement on the radio saying that Godzilla has entered the city. Meanwhile, Noriko is on a train headed home when she sees Godzilla destroying the city. The monster eventually picks up her train, and as he destroys part of it, she falls off. She eventually manages to join a crowd to escape, but as she seems really slow, Koichi shows up and drags her to come with him. Before they realize what's happening, Godzilla releases a serious heat ray that destroys everything around him. As the wave almost gets to Noriko and Koichi, she pushes him to safety while she then gets blown away. After the wave stops and Godzilla leaves, Koichi comes out and looks devastated to see that Noriko sacrificed herself to save him. When he returns home, he stays silent as Noda and his co-workers share their confidences. Shortly after, Koichi blames himself for her death because he thinks the dead mechanics are trying to punish him. While he's being hard on himself, Noda tells him that some private citizens are working on a strategy to kill Godzilla. The next day, Koichi then attends a meeting of former ex-naval officers who are trying to find a way to kill Godzilla. Shortly after, Noda starts explaining the strategy to everyone present. He mentions that they can sink Godzilla using a bubble membrane. As everyone wonders what he means, Noda says the plan is to trap Godzilla using bubble-filled cylinders that will drag the monster down the sea. He adds that they'll also use levitation devices to bring Godzilla back up. Since the monster might not be too comfortable with such a drastic change in pressure, Noda says he expects that when Godzilla comes back to the surface, the monster would be vulnerable enough to allow the men to kill it. Following this, Koichi stands up to ask if Noda can promise that his plan will kill Godzilla. Noda then says he can't do that because it's a plan that hasn't been tested before. As Koichi then chooses to leave, Noda begs him to wait and listen to the rest of the plan. After Noda explains everything, some of the men opt out and leave because they're not ready to sacrifice their lives. However, the ones who stay believe it's possible to kill Godzilla. Later that day, while Akitsu complains about Noda's plan having a lot of holes, Koichi asks if Noda can get him a fighter jet. He says he can shoot Godzilla to anger him and get him trapped in the right place. Noda says he'll see what he can do, but Akitsu thinks it's too dangerous. He then asks if Koichi is trying to avenge Noriko by killing himself, and he says he doesn't see it as a problem. However, Akitsu looks angry and asks why he never married her when he knew he liked her. Koichi then looks disappointed, saying it's because there were some things bothering him. The next day, Noda gets Koichi the plane he wants, but he mentions that the jet needs to be fixed by a mechanic. Koichi says he knows the right person for the job, and he then starts asking around at naval offices to see if anyone knows where Tachibana is. Unfortunately, no one seems to know, and Noda suggests getting someone else. However, Koichi says he only wants Tachibana. He then writes several letters and sends them out to different naval quarters to see if he can find Tachibana. Later that night, Koichi suddenly gets attacked by someone, and he immediately passes out. When he wakes up, he sees that Tachibana was the one who hit him. Even though he looks happy, Tachibana is very angry because Koichi wrote in the letters that the mechanic was responsible for what happened on the airfield. Koichi then says he knew he had to anger Tachibana to get him to come out. He also mentions what he wants the mechanic to do, but Tachibana says he's not interested. As he's then leaving, Koichi mentions that he wants to fly a jet with explosives into Godzilla's mouth to avenge the deaths of Noriko and the other mechanics. Even though this means he's willing to die, Tachibana sees that he's serious about it, and as Koichi begs again, the mechanic agrees to help. Days later, Noda's radiation detection devices spot Godzilla nearby, so he tells his men to go home and spend the night with their families because they'll leave to face Godzilla the next day. After the meeting, Noda and Akitsu tell Mizushima that he won't be coming with them. He looks disappointed and says he also wants to defend his country, but Akitsu says it's important for him to stay back. As Akitsu and Noda are then talking, they mention that they're leaving Mizushima behind to protect him. That night, Sumiko returns Akiko to Koichi, who then takes her home. When they get there, Akiko shows him a drawing she made of him and Noriko. As she then starts crying after remembering Noriko, Koichi consoles her. Very early in the morning, while she's still sleeping, he leaves an envelope near her pillow. He then heads out and goes to meet Tachibana. As the mechanic shows him all the controls on the jet, Koichi says he can't believe he's suddenly nervous because a part of him wants him to live. However, as he looks at Akiko's drawing, he tells Tachibana that he's not going back on his plan because he wants Akiko to have a future. Elsewhere, Akiko takes the envelope to Sumiko, who opens it and sees a lot of money as well as a note from Koichi telling her to take care of the girl. Meanwhile, some of the naval officers on the sea pick up signals of Godzilla's imminent arrival. They immediately inform Noda, who then decides to leave the port and head into the sea to begin his plan. As they board the boat, Akitsu mentions that he's worried about Koichi since he's after revenge. However, Noda says he's sure Koichi won't do anything risky because he knows he has to go back for Akiko. Before the men then leave the port, they see a ship flying across the dock until it crashes and explodes. With this, Noda realizes that Godzilla is around. Elsewhere, Tachibana salutes Koichi as he leaves the workshop to begin his mission. As the monster then invades the port, Akitsu wonders if the plan will still work, but Noda says that Koichi will have to lure it back into the sea. Shortly after, Koichi then calls to inform them that he's about to lure Godzilla out. Noda gives him the go-ahead, but as Akitsu tells him not to try anything stupid that will make Akiko an orphan again, Koichi ignores him. Elsewhere, while Sumiko is still wondering what she'll do with Akiko, a mailman drops a letter for Koichi. As she then reads it, she looks surprised. Meanwhile, Koichi successfully lures Godzilla back into the sea. However, the monster suddenly shoots a heat ray that almost damages all the ships. Akitsu then tells Noda that they can still cancel their plans. Despite this, Noda orders all his men to release the cylinders into the sea. As they do this, they wait for the perfect time for Godzilla to fall into their trap. Shortly after, Godzilla gets trapped, and the plan works as the monster reaches the bottom of the sea. As the levitation device then starts bringing him back up, it gets stuck. While Noda and Akitsu wonder what happened, they realize that Godzilla has eaten through some parts of the levitation device. As the monster then starts pulling the ships, Noda and all his men are left worried for their lives. However, Mizushima suddenly shows up with some other boats, saying he knew he could always help. This makes Akitsu happy, and he says he never thought he'd be so glad to see Mizushima. Following this, Mizushima's fleet starts pulling Noda's ships to make sure Godzilla doesn't sink them. As the monster then returns to the surface, Noda sees that he's not really damaged. Before he can think of what to do next, Godzilla starts preparing for another heat ray. As Noda and all the men hold their breaths because the next heat ray will wipe them out, they see Koichi heading for Godzilla's open mouth. Akitsu looks shocked and wonders what he's doing, but Koichi still keeps going until he crashes the plane into the monster's mouth before it releases another heat ray. As everyone looks worried that Koichi sacrificed himself, Noda suddenly spots him using a parachute. It then turns out that Tachibana added a new ejection button to the fighter jet so that Koichi would have a chance to escape. Following this, Godzilla explodes and gets destroyed by the bomb inside Koichi's jet. As the monster's scattered body parts then sink, everyone salutes Koichi. When he arrives back on land, everyone also cheers for him. He then sees Sumiko and Akiko in the crowd. Sumiko immediately runs to him and shows him the letter he received, and this leaves him shocked when he reads it. Shortly after, Koichi takes Akiko to a hospital where he sees Noriko still alive. As she sees him, she looks happy and asks if he's now at peace. However, Koichi just starts crying as he goes to hug her while feeling relieved that he didn't lose her.